Evidence reveals how the pyramids were actually built. You likely studied the Egyptian pyramids during your elementary school years. You were also likely to come across some knowledge about them in a book or at a museum, even if you didn't attend public school. It is difficult to escape these enormous buildings because they are renowned for their grandeur, to use a mild term. The Great Pyramid of Giza was formerly the highest in Egypt, rising to a height of 481 feet, but it has now been vandalized, eroding to a height of 451 feet. Pyramid number 1. Before delving into the specifics of who constructed them, let's begin with some Pyramid 1. Are we ready? In Egypt, there are currently roughly 80 pyramids standing. The oldest is the Djoser Pyramid, which is situated north of Memphis in Saqqara. The pyramid was constructed for King Djoser in 2630 BC. A large number of the more well-known pyramids may be seen in Giza, a city outside of Cairo. They include the Pyramid of Khufu, one of the 7 wonders of the world, and the Giza Necropolis, the Khafra Pyramid, and the Pyramid of Menkaure. The belief in an afterlife was initially introduced by ancient Egyptian culture. They considered death to be an interruption, rather than the end of life. They held that a king's ka, or portion of his spirit, persisted after his death, using his actual physique. We've all heard of mummification, which has also gained popularity in the media. It served to protect the king's soul, which they thought to be immortal. In essence, they believed that the king's soul would reanimate his body. Therefore, the king's ka was never without. They would also bury wealth such as gold, utensils, food, furnishings, and the deceased monarch. The Egyptians took this idea quite seriously. They worshipped the pharaoh as an incarnation of Horus, the god of the sky. While he was still living, and after his death, he assumed the shape of Osiris, the underworld's and fertility god. As Osiris, it was his duty to set the sun, and his son, the incoming king, would lift it. They believed that the preservation of cosmic balance depended on this symbiotic interaction. But let's go back to the pyramids. They were made primarily of stone, such as limestone, which was utilized to construct the pyramid center, while white limestone was utilized to create the structure's exterior and the internal wall surfaces. The interior walls were covered in pink granite, with occasional use of alabaster and basalt about the floors. Erroneous beliefs. Egypt was never a country of stone scarcity, as it has sometimes been called. Occasionally, they utilized basalt from the Fayum Depression, one of the largest oases in the Western Desert, while alabaster originated in Luxor, a city located on the eastern bank of the Nile. The ancient technology expert Dennis Stocks thought that moving would require 45 workers and 8 persons to carry a 35,900 pounds, 16.3 ton block, as he mentioned in experiments in Egyptian archaeology. Stoneworking technology, published in 2003 in the Egyptian Ancient World. The construction of a single pyramid project might have taken 20 to 30 years to complete. It was long believed that slaves acting under the command of a malevolent pharaoh constructed the pyramids, and Herodotus is primarily to blame for this false information. The Greek historian claimed that 100,000 slaves built the Great Pyramid and labored incessantly, with a new group taking over every 3 months. The BBC goes on to say that King Khufu, the Egyptian king of the 4th dynasty, cannot possibly be held accountable for such a vast workforce of slaves to labor for the Great Pyramid's commissioning, and it is not possible for them to all work simultaneously. We can also partially attribute the myth's continuation to Western Hollywood productions, films such as the 1956 classic, The 10 Commandments. And we're not just stating that, it is an actual 220-minute epic narrative in which slaves are portrayed as the builders. The idea that Jews constructed the pyramids is another myth that has been around. Menachem Begin, a former Israeli prime minister, first made the false statement when he paid a visit to the National Museum in Cairo in 1977. Amichai Mazar, an academic at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem's Institute of Archaeology, disputes Begin's assertion, since it just doesn't make any sense at all. No Jews built the pyramids because at the time the pyramids were built, Jews did not exist. Mazar was quoted as saying. Biblical Archaeology Review editor Dorothy Resig of Washington, D.C., stated that this untruth may have also originated from a passage in Exodus that reads something like this. So the Pharaoh forced the children of Israel to perform backbreaking labor as slaves by the Egyptians, forcing them to labor on construction projects. Though the verse doesn't read quite like that, you get the idea. Alternatively, there exist individuals who think that aliens are the ones who constructed them. Let's all exhale deeply. This comprehensive theory appears somewhat like this. Given that light travels at a speed of 299,792,458 meters per second, and the coordinates of the Great Pyramid are located at 29.979245 Dagon, and scientists were unable to measure the speed of light with this degree of precision until 1950, advanced aliens had to have returned to Earth through time travel to construct the pyramids. Those who subscribe to the hypothesis of ancient aliens also believe that aliens constructed Stonehenge in the UK and other historic sites. As it stands, we bear no responsibility for your beliefs or lack thereof, but we are claiming that additional evidence and graffiti found inside the pyramids paint a very different story and have brought archaeologists, and now less, one step closer to understanding who built the pyramids and what would have been their way of life and method. Employees. According to the BBC, archaeologists concur that the Great Pyramid's labor force consisted of the primary workers team and the temporary workers team. Approximately 4,000 primary laborers, including haulers, worked in the quarries and masons. They resided in a pyramidal village with their families. The 16,000 to 20,000 temporary team members created ramps, shaped tools, manufactured mortar, and oversaw various tasks like providing food, clothing, and fuel. They were residing close to the pyramid village in a different camp. The condition of the Nile was another major consideration for the builders of the pyramids. For the construction of the Giza pyramid, archaeologist Mark Lenner, more on him later, and Zahi Hawass stated that a skeleton crew would work on the pyramids throughout the year. But when the Nile flooded in late summer and early autumn, a greater labor force would work in the vicinity. Not everything that needs to be known about the towns and camps where archaeologists worked has been uncovered. But pyramid builders lived there. However, archaeologist excavations conducted between 1999 and 2002 clarified further. We are aware that they slept on mud ramps that resembled bunk beds. These barracks were located in galleries, which resemble enormous dormitories where up to 2,000 contract workers would remain on site. There were other areas for cooking and copperworking in the back of these sleeping galleries. Yukinori Koei, an Egyptologist and archaeologist, addressed a recording audience in 2016 for National Geographic Live. He stated in that conversation that the outside of the pyramid contained a large quantity of data, nevertheless insufficient within the buildings themselves or at their core, which would shed further clarification on the building methods. Before discussing his findings, he presented 3 theories regarding how the center of a pyramid would provide insight into building methods. For instance, if the pyramid's interior consisted of blocks stacked horizontally, it would have been possible to use a straight ramp for this. But what he discovered was not like any of these. Along with other team members, including some computer scientists, he spent 2.5 hours climbing the Great Pyramid and discovered a cave that was farther inside, as well as a notch with a crack. The group lacked a laser scanner, which would have been cumbersome to transport. Although they were climbing, they were able to record 20 minutes of film, which they subsequently deconstructed into 300,000 three-dimensional pictures. They discovered through these 3D image simulations that the cave was utilized for the packaging of sand and rubble, a process known as the chamber method. He mentioned that Egyptian cities and temples were built with it as well. What did builders of pyramids eat? As it happened, they had nothing against meat. Every day, farms would send them up to 21 cattle and 23 sheep to collect their flesh. They enjoyed drinking beer and eating fish as well. And even though previously mentioned, these people were not slaves, pyramid construction occurred at a cost. The discoveries of their lower vertebrae and bodies reveal they had arthritis and were affected by deterioration and hurt. As previously stated, a massive quantity of stone was required to construct these pyramids. Thus, the Egyptians needed to devise a productive method for transporting the blocks they ultimately placed upward. A depiction found in Jehuthotep's tomb from the 12th dynasty shows 172 men pushing a 60-ton alabaster block on a sled that had a thin layer of water sprinkled on the sand. This became one of the most famous techniques for transporting stones, a practice subsequently tried and verified in a 2014 physics study published in Physical Review Letters. The force on the sled was about equal to that exerted on the wet sand because the blocks were too heavy to be transported by the sled alone. When the sand became moist, the sand was tightly packed by the sled, preventing the sled from becoming buried. Moving the sled became simpler after water was sprayed, according to research. However, the mystery of how and when the pyramids were built is still a fascinating one. The answers will be fascinating to witness once all the myths and legends about them have been resolved. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe for more exclusive content and updates.